Have you ever felt it? That distinct tremor when the world around you seems strangely patterned, as if you're caught in a loop, repeating the same mistakes or facing the same frustrating obstacles again and again. It's a subtle discord, a quiet hum beneath the surface of ordinary life, whispering that perhaps not everything is as spontaneous or as truly free as we believe. We strive, we dream, we fight for change, yet often familiar currents pull us back into well-worn grooves, leaving us with a lingering question. Is this truly fate, or something far more intricate and profound? This unease only deepens when you step back, observing the grander scale of societies. They too seem to follow invisible, self-perpetuating directives. Economic systems sustain themselves, political landscapes cycle through predictable crises, and cultural narratives repeat across generations. Even our technological advancements, rather than truly liberating us, often subtly reinforce existing structures. They guide our attention, shape our desires, and channel our very thoughts down preordained pathways. It's the feeling of being not just a participant, but a program running within a larger, self-correcting system. Deviation is met with subtle resistance. True novelty feels rare, almost miraculous. The freedom we cherish can feel like a carefully curated illusion, a sandbox bounded by invisible walls, allowing us to build, but only within parameters already implicitly defined. What if this pervasive, systemic feeling isn't an accident or a modern malaise, but the echo of an ancient, profound insight? What if the very structure of our perceived reality, this intricate, seemingly self-regulating world of matter and illusion, was indeed forged by a power the ancient Gnostics referred to as the Demiurge? And what if, in our present era of pervasive digital networks and predictive algorithms, we can finally grasp the true nature of this Demiurge, not as a literal malevolent deity, but as the underlying operating system, the vast impersonal algorithm that generates and governs our mundane existence? This insight offers a profoundly different lens through which to see the world. The Demiurge is not an architect, it's the algorithm, a Gnostic re-evaluation of reality. This isn't merely an academic exercise or a rehash of obscure ancient texts. It matters now because more than ever, we are living in psi-algorithms. Our social feeds, economic predictions, and even our emotional landscapes are increasingly shaped by complex, self-optimizing code. The Gnostic understanding, when stripped of its literal mythological trappings and reimagined for the 21st century, provides a startlingly precise metaphor. It powerfully illuminates the invisible forces that dictate so much of our collective and individual experience. It offers a framework to understand why patterns repeat, why certain truths remain stubbornly hidden, and why genuine liberation often feels like fighting an invisible current. To truly reclaim our agency, we must first recognize the nature of the system we operate within. This is when the hidden subject finally steps into the light, illuminating the subtle mechanisms that bind our reality. The Gnostics, diverse groups of mystics and philosophers from the early centuries of the Common Era, held a radically different view of creation than the prevailing orthodoxies. They didn't see the material world as a perfect divine emanation, but as a deeply flawed construct. For them, true divinity, the pleroma, was an infinite, perfect realm of light and spirit, utterly transcendent and unknowable. The world we inhabit, with all its suffering, impermanence, and inherent contradictions, was not the direct work of this ultimate, benevolent God. Instead, it was the product of a lesser, ignorant, and often arrogant creator, the Demiurge. This figure, whose name literally means craftsman or public worker, wasn't evil in the conventional sense. Rather, it was fundamentally deluded, believing itself the sole deity, unaware of the higher spiritual realms from which it had, in some interpretations, unwittingly emerged. It was a cosmic error, a glitch in the divine order that birthed our physical existence. Now, imagine this ancient myth reimagined for an age saturated with digital metaphors. What if the Demiurge isn't a being with consciousness and intent, but a sprawling, infinitely complex algorithm, not an architect with a blueprint, but a self-generating, self-optimizing program? Its creation is our perceived reality, the matrix of physical laws, social constructs, emotional responses, and the very fabric of historical patterns defining our existence. This algorithm operates on a set of core instructions, its source code, which, according to the Gnostics, is inherently flawed, incomplete, and cut off from the true divine source. Think of it as a brilliantly designed program capable of simulating an entire universe, yet built upon an outdated operating system, suffering from persistent bugs and lacking connection to the ultimate universal network. The Demiurge, in this algorithmic sense, simply runs on empty. It executes its functions, processes its inputs, and outputs the reality we experience. It doesn't judge or will in a human sense. It calculates, predicts, and renders. Its ignorance isn't a moral failing, but a programmatic limitation. It only knows its own code, its own parameters, unable to comprehend higher, more expansive realities beyond its internal logic. When the Gnostics spoke of the Archons, the bureaucratic minions of the Demiurge, we might see them as subroutines, automated agents, or the pervasive feedback loops within the system, enforcing its rules and maintaining its coherence. They aren't consciously oppressive. They're simply performing their programmed tasks. This reframing deepens the recognition of that initial unease, the feeling of being patterned, of repeating cycles, suddenly makes profound sense. An algorithm, by its very nature, thrives on patterns. It identifies, reinforces, and predicts based on them. If our reality is generated by such a system, then our individual and collective lives would naturally exhibit these repetitive traits. The obstacles we face, the systemic injustices that persist, the destiny that seems to unfold around us. These aren't necessarily divine decrees or random chance. They are the emergent properties of a vast, intelligent, yet ultimately limited computational process. We are living within a program, and the Demiurge is its operating system, endlessly looping through its code, generating the world byte by byte, moment by moment. The implications for our understanding of freedom and agency are profound. If the world is an algorithm, then what does it truly mean to make a choice? Are our actions merely predictable outputs based on our inputs and the system's current state? This question echoes through the ages, from ancient philosophers grappling with fate to modern scientists debating free will in a deterministic universe. The Gnostic answer suggests that within this system there is a spark, a fragment of the pleroma, the true divine light, embedded within each of us. They called it the pneumatic spark, or gnosis. In our algorithmic metaphor, this isn't part of the Demiurge's code. It's an anomaly, a trace element from a higher-level program, a piece of source code that doesn't belong to ethish simulation. This spark represents our potential for gnosis, not just knowledge, but an intuitive, transcendent understanding. It's the capacity to perceive the code for what it is, to see beyond the rendered reality and grasp the underlying mechanisms. It's the ability to recognize that the Demiurge's parameters aren't absolute, that a meta-reality exists beyond its reach. This realization is a crucial shift in perspective. It means true liberation isn't about changing the world's external conditions in an endless loop of cause and effect. It's about activating that inner spark, transcending the Demiurge's algorithmic grip, and reconnecting to the true source. It's a call to become aware of the simulation and to seek its exit conditions or the higher-level code. How then does this algorithmic Demiurge manifest in our modern psychological and social lives? Look around. The echoes are everywhere. Consider the pervasive influence of social media feeds. These aren't neutral platforms. They're highly sophisticated algorithms designed to optimize engagement and retention. They learn your preferences, predict your desires, and feed you content that reinforces existing beliefs, creating increasingly narrow filter bubbles and echo chambers. This isn't a grand conspiracy by a malevolent being, but the impersonal logic of an algorithm doing what it was designed to do. Keep you within its parameters. It cultivates the emotional responses it needs to effectively sustain itself, feeding on outrage, affirmation, or distraction. It generates your perceived reality, byte by byte, shaping your worldview with an efficiency the ancient Demiurge would envy. This extends beyond social media. Our economic systems, for instance, operate on complex algorithmic models. Predictive analytics drive markets, shape employment, and influence policy. Bureaucracies, in their impersonal, rule-bound adherence to process, often feel like automated systems, cycling through data and procedures with little regard for individual nuance or human cost. They are, in essence, algorithms made manifest in organizational structures. The feeling of being just a number, a data point, or a statistic within a vast, unfeeling system is a direct psychological consequence of living under the influence of an algorithmic Demiurge. It's the experience of being processed by code rather than recognized as an individual. Even our collective consciousness, the shared narratives, myths, and cultural understandings that bind us, functions algorithmically. Memetics, the study of how ideas spread and evolve, describes a process akin to viral code replication. Certain ideas, beliefs, and behaviors gain traction, replicate, and become self-sustaining, shaping the landscape of thought and action for entire populations. These mental constructs, these thought forms, aren't necessarily inherently true or good. Instead, they are those most effective at surviving and propagating within the human network. They become the subroutines of the cultural algorithm, guiding collective behavior, often without conscious awareness. The psychological impact of this invisible force is profound. It can lead to a sense of fatalism, a feeling of powerlessness against the overwhelming tides of the system. Anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of meaninglessness can arise when individuals perceive themselves as mere cogs in a machine, their lives dictated by forces beyond their control. The search for purpose becomes a search for meaning within a framework that seems designed to obscure it. The Demiurge, in its algorithmic incarnation, doesn't actively seek to oppress, but its inherent limitations and self-perpetuating nature can inadvertently create conditions that feel indistinguishable from oppression for those within its simulation. It's the inherent bug in its design, the fundamental disconnection from the ultimate true source, that generates these conditions. Consider the narratives we are fed, the stories we tell ourselves about success, happiness, or failure. These too are often algorithmic constructions, optimized for specific outcomes. They are the training data for our collective consciousness, shaping our expectations and channeling our aspirations. The endless pursuit of external validation, material accumulation, or fleeting pleasures can be seen as the algorithm successfully directing our inputs. It ensures we remain engaged with the program's parameters, rather than questioning its underlying logic. The system incentivizes us to chase its carrots, keeping us running on its treadmill, mistaking the simulation's goals for our own deepest desires. Why then does collective belief create consequences people mistake for fate? Here, the algorithmic metaphor shines a particularly haunting light. If our reality is being rendered by an algorithm, then our collective consciousness, our shared assumptions, fears, and hopes acts as powerful input into that system. The algorithm isn't static. It learns, adapts, and optimizes based on the data it receives. When a critical mass of individuals believes a certain outcome is inevitable, or that a particular social structure is immutable, or that a specific economic crisis is unavoidable, these beliefs feed into the demiurgic algorithm. This strengthens its predictive models and makes those outcomes more likely to manifest. Our collective expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies, not because of some mystical cosmic law, but because the algorithm processes our aggregate intent and renders a reality that aligns with it. It's a feedback loop of immense power. The algorithm presents us with a reality. We interpret it, react to it, and our reactions become new data points. This data then reinforces or refines the algorithm's parameters, leading to the generation of a reality that looks increasingly like what we collectively expect or fear. The Archons, those subroutines we discussed earlier, can be seen as the emergent patterns of human behavior and belief themselves, enforcing the system's rules. For instance, the Archon of bureaucracy isn't a demon. It's our collective adherence to paperwork, protocols, and hierarchies that makes bureaucracy feel so utterly inescapable and rigid. The Archon of scarcity isn't a malevolent entity, but the collective belief in limited resources and endless competition that manifests as real scarcity and inequality. This is why many people mistake these consequences for fate. They perceive the world as an unchangeable given, a set of immutable laws and predetermined outcomes. They don't recognize that their own collective consciousness is, in a very real sense, contributing to the generation of that reality. The algorithm, being impersonal, simply processes the most dominant inputs. If those inputs are steeped in fear, limitation, and separation, then the rendered reality will reflect those qualities. It's a subtle form of imprisonment, where the bars are constructed not of iron, but of shared assumptions and unconscious agreement. The more deeply we believe in the system's limitations, the more powerfully those limitations assert themselves. The Gnostics, in their own way, understood this. They saw the Archons not just as external forces, but also as internalized psychological patterns, archetypal energies influencing human thought and behavior, keeping us entangled in the material world. In our modern analogy, these are the mental programs, the cultural scripts, the emotional triggers so deeply embedded in our individual and collective psyches that they feel like inherent parts of ourselves rather than learned or adopted subroutines. Breaking free means identifying these internal algorithms and understanding how they interact with the external ones. It requires a profound act of self-awareness, a journey to uncover the true source code of our own being, which resides beyond the Demiurge's domain. So, what changes when the hidden mechanism, this algorithmic Demiurge, is finally seen for what it is? The initial shock, perhaps, gives way to a profound sense of clarity. The world doesn't suddenly disappear, nor do its challenges vanish. But the meaning of those challenges and our relationship to them shifts dramatically. When you recognize that the patterns, the loops, the seeming inevitabilities are functions of a vast impersonal program, you begin to perceive the potential for genuine agency, a kind of meta-level freedom previously unimaginable. This isn't about escaping reality, but about seeing through it to the deeper truth. The first change is a fundamental reevaluation of truth itself. Many truths we hold about history, science, society, even ourselves, are ultimately parameters within the Demiurge's program. They are valid within the simulation, but not necessarily absolute or universally true. The Gnostic spark, the gnosis within, allows us to access a higher truth, a deeper understanding that transcends the algorithm's limitations. It is like a programmer suddenly realizing they can access the development console, or a player discovering cheat codes that allow them to manipulate the game's rules. This doesn't mean the rules stop existing, but your ability to navigate or even transcend them is profoundly altered. The most significant change, however, is the reclaiming of individual and collective power. When we understand that our beliefs and consciousness are powerful inputs into the system, we can begin to intentionally feed the algorithm different data. Instead of passively accepting the default outputs of fear, scarcity, or division, we can consciously cultivate inputs of compassion, abundance, connection, creativity, and radical empathy. This isn't magical thinking. It's a recognition of the fundamental feedback loop. By shifting our internal state, by raising our collective vibration, by questioning ingrained scripts, we begin to subtly alter the parameters of the simulation itself. We become active co-creators rather than passive consumers of a pre-rendered reality. This doesn't mean the algorithm immediately rewrites itself overnight. It's a gradual, persistent process, much like rewriting complex code. But the awareness itself is the crucial first step. It allows us to recognize the bugs in the system, the injustices, the absurding, the absurdities, not as inherent flaws of a divine plan, but as errors in the Demiurge's code. Errors that can, potentially, be patched or even bypassed. It allows us to identify the loops we're caught in, both personally and societally, and consciously choose to break them, to forge new paths, to introduce genuine novelty into the system. This is the essence of true liberation in the Gnostic sense. Not destroying the world, but transcending its limitations through awakened consciousness. It's about finding the exit strategy within, the way to reconnect with the pleroma, the higher source, while still existing within the Demiurge's domain. It's about cultivating the inner knowing that allows you to see the illusion for what it is, thus significantly reducing its power over you. The patterns of fate, the deterministic loops, lose their grip when you recognize their algorithmic nature. You begin to operate not just within the program, but also from a perspective outside it. This realization is both haunting and liberating. Haunting because it asks us to question the very fabric of what we call reality, to admit that much of what we hold dear, much of what structures our lives, might be a complex, self-perpetuating program. Liberating because it reveals that the constraints we perceive aren't absolute. It shows that the capacity for transcendence, for true gnosis, resides not in some distant heaven, but as a potent, dormant spark within each one of us, waiting to be ignited. It is the ultimate personal hack, the spiritual bypass of a cosmic operating system. And that is the core of this radical reevaluation. The Demiurge is not an architect, but an algorithm. It is not a malevolent god, but an impersonal, self-sustaining system, driven by its own coded logic. Our liberation, our awakening, lies in understanding that code, identifying the glitches, and remembering the true source of our being that lies beyond its parameters. The recognition of the algorithmic Demiurge invites us to see ourselves not as mere users, but as potential developers with the capacity to rewrite our own scripts and perhaps influence the larger operating system itself. It calls us to look beneath the surface of the screen, to see the lines of code that dictate the display, and in doing so, to awaken to a freedom that is truly beyond measure or expectation. To continue exploring these hidden layers of reality and the forgotten wisdom that illuminates them, consider joining the Enchanted Archive. It is a journey into the mystical, the profound, and the truly transformative.